All right, ready to dig into some serious history. We're tackling Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. A deep dive into why some societies took off while others, well, didn't. And spoiler alert, it's not about one group being inherently better.
Yeah, Diamond throws that old theory right out the window. He's all about ditching those assumptions about some groups being destined to rule the world, and instead he's like, follow the trail of geography, the quirks of climate, even what plants and animals were just hanging out in certain places early on.
Like a history lesson where location, location, location is the name of the game.
Exactly. But we're talking continents, not cul-de-sacs, right?
Yeah.
Diamond takes us way, way back to when our ancestors were fanning out across the globe. Picture this. Ice Age, sea levels way lower, these land bridges connecting places that seem totally cut off now.
Okay, so Earth's a little different back then.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Where are we headed first?
Australia. And what did those early explorers find? Think, like prehistoric safari, giant kangaroos, wombats the size of a car, marsupial lions.
Oh, look, Australia had lions.
They did. Megafauna out the wazoo, but then poof, gone.
Okay, now that's just a tease. What happened?
Well, that's what Diamond digs into. Was it climate change that did them in, or did our ancestors hunt these incredible creatures to extinction?
I'm sensing a theme here. Is Diamond ever satisfied with the easy answer?
Not a chance. He wants us wrestling with the big questions. He leans toward human impact in Australia, though, and this ties into a bigger point. It's those early choices that have ripple effects through, well, everything.
So no herds of giant wombats pulling plows means Australia takes a different path.
Precisely. No easy source of muscle power, different resources to work with. It all adds up. Without those massive mammals to domesticate, Australia's development takes a very different path. Their technology, how their societies were structured, it's all connected.
Makes you think about the choices we're making now, right? Like what's going to seem obvious to historians 1,000 years from now. But okay, back to those early migrations. Diamond tackles the Clovis first theory, the idea that the Americas were first populated by the Clovis people around 11,000 BC. But then, where's the evidence of what came before them?
And that's what's so interesting, right? Especially when you compare it to a place like Australia with tons of pre-Clovis sites. It's like the Clovis people just appeared.
Poofed into existence, just like those megafauna vanished. Except in reverse.
Exactly. And then there's the whole other thing. The mass extinction of mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, all around the time the Clovis people supposedly show up.
Okay, now that's just suspicious timing. What's Diamond's take?
He wants us to think. Could there have been earlier migrations we haven't uncovered yet? Did human arrival somehow trigger these extinctions, like maybe in Australia? He's less interested in giving us all the answers and more about getting us to ask the right questions, you know?
So less history textbook, more historical detective novel. I can dig it.
Exactly. It's about connecting those dots, looking for the patterns. And it's not just about how long a society has been around. Diamond talks about this head start idea.
Like, even if you've been in the game forever, if your environment didn't nudge you towards certain discoveries early on, you're already behind.
Exactly. It's like missing those crucial first few levels in a tech tree, you know? Whoever stumbled upon, say, plants that were easy to domesticate that gave them a surplus of food. Think wheat and barley in the Fertile Crescent.
Yeah.
They were off to the races.
While everyone else is stuck foraging for berries.
Pretty much. And that surplus, that changes everything. Suddenly you have specialized labor, complex societies, the whole concept of a nation state. It all stems from that head start.
Okay, so location, location, location. Plus a dash of lucky breaks in the plant and animal department.
But hold on. Are we hopping over to the Polynesian Islands for a second? Seems random, but I've learned to trust your tangents by now.
Trust me, this is key. Polynesia is like Diamond's natural experiment. You've got the same ancestors spread across all these different islands, but they ended up with wildly different societies.
Really? How so? You've got peaceful hunter-gatherers on one island, fierce warriors on another. It all comes down to how the environment steered their development. Diamond even talks about these two groups. The Moriori of the Chatham Islands, super peaceful, limited resources, everyone gets along.
Sounds idyllic until someone wants to start a turf war.
And then you've got the Maori of New Zealand, who developed a, well, let's call it a much more assertive culture.
Driven by what? Competition for land, resources.
Exactly. And it just goes to show, even with shared roots, the hand you're dealt, the size of your island, how isolated you are, what grows there, it all shapes your destiny.
And sometimes determines whether you're the one holding the spear or facing it. Speaking of which, this takes us to one of history's most dramatic clashes. Okay, bring on the drama. Pizarro and Atahualpa, 1532. This has to be one of the most one-sided showdowns in history, right?
Total David and Goliath situation. You've got Pizarro, this Spanish conquistador with, what, less than 200 guys, going up against Atahualpa, the Inca emperor, and an army of, wait for it, 80,000.
Seriously, that's not even a fair fight. It'd be like a mosquito versus a tank. How does Pizarro even stand a chance?
That's where Diamond's whole thesis kicks in. This is guns, germs, and steel in action. It wasn't just brute force that handed Pizarro the win. It was this whole chain of factors set in motion by, you guessed it, geography and the environment.
Okay, break it down for me. What were those key advantages Pizarro brought to the party?
So on the surface, you've got what Diamond calls the proximate factors. Guns, germs, and steel, literally. The Spanish had better weapons, obviously. Horses, huge for mobility back then. And that steel armor basically made them walking tanks against the Inca weapons.
Not exactly a level playing field when one side's packing muskets and the other's got, what, pointed sticks?
Pretty much. But it gets even more lopsided. Let's not forget the germs. Smallpox, measles, influenza. The Inca had zero immunity to these European diseases.
Right, because nothing says conquest, like a plague, wiping out half your enemy's forces before you even engage.
Grim, but true. But those are just the immediate reasons, right? Diamond's big point is we got to go deeper. Those proximate factors, they came from somewhere. He wants us to understand the ultimate factors, the stuff way back in history, the environmental forces that made the Spanish so dominant in the first place.
It was like the germs and steel were just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. It all boils down to, drumroll, food production. Diamond says that shift, going from hunting and gathering to actually farming, that was the turning point in human history. Denser populations, specialized labor, complex societies. It all traces back to having a food surplus.
So the Spanish, with their head start in farming, they had more time to work on those tech trees, so to speak, which eventually leads to those guns, germs, and steel.
Bingo. And Diamond points to a specific region as the OG breadbasket, the Fertile Crescent. Those folks hit the jackpot, plant-wise and animal-wise. Wheat, barley, sheep, goats. It was like Mother Nature's agricultural starter pack.
And the Americas. Didn't they have agriculture too?
They did, but not quite the same. Fewer animals suitable for domestication, and their main crops, like maize and potatoes, weren't as protein-packed as wheat and barley.
So it's not just about having farms, it's about what you're farming and what those crops do for your society.
Exactly. There's a domino effect. Diamond even talks about preemptive domestication. Like, if a society had already domesticated a certain type of plant, they were less likely to bother with a similar species later on, even if it was available.
Hold on. So even if they stumble upon something better, they might just ignore it because they're already set in their ways.
Sometimes, yeah. It's like, imagine if your phone battery lasted a week, but some company comes along with a slightly better battery, but it only lasts 6 days. Would you switch?
Point taken. We're creatures of habit. But, okay, back to those early empires. We've got food production, bigger populations, specialized labor, the works. But how did those societies spread their influence so far?
Geography strikes again. Diamond talks about how the literal shape of continents, even which way they're tilted, had a huge impact on how crops, technology, even ideas all spread out.
He's talking about those east-west versus north-south axes, right?
Right.
Like how Eurasia, being long and spread out east-west, made it easier for things to diffuse compared to the Americas, which are more north-south.
You got it. Think about it. Crops that do well in a certain climate, they're going to spread easier along that same latitude, right? East-west. But try going north-south, and you're hitting all sorts of different climates, different challenges.
So wheat that grows great in, say, Egypt might not cut it in, like Scandinavia.
Exactly. Same goes for animals, technologies, even diseases. And languages, don't forget those.
Yeah.
It's wild how much geography shaped, well, everything.
Like a giant game of global strategy played out over millennia.
And as those early societies get more complex, populations booming, well, new challenges pop up. Challenges that, according to Diamond, often lead to the rise of kleptocracies.
Klepto what now? It sounds ominous.
It's not exactly a happy term. Basically, Diamond's argument is that any state, even the ones we think of as super successful, they all come down to systems that are designed to funnel wealth to a small elite, the kleptocrats.
So even those bigger, more organized societies, the ones that grew out of all that agricultural efficiency, they end up with a system that benefits a select few at the expense of everyone else.
That's Diamond's point, yeah. Though, to be fair, he also says that states do have their upsides. Large-scale cooperation, maintaining order, building infrastructure, all that good stuff.
It's like that old saying, you can't make an omelet without you know, exploiting a few peasants.
Something like that. Though it's worth noting, not every society went down that same path. Diamond uses the example of New Guinea to illustrate this.
New Guinea.
Yeah.
Right, they developed agriculture totally independently, didn't they? But they never really reached the same level of, well, empire building as those Eurasian societies.
Right. And Diamond says there are a few reasons for that. Fewer domesticable animals to work with, for one. Their terrain's way more mountainous, so it's harder to build those sprawling empires. And they were pretty isolated from other societies, which limited the exchange of ideas and technologies.
So even though they were skilled farmers, they got kind of stuck, geographically speaking.
You could say that. And it highlights how interconnected all these factors are, how a few differences in the environment can make a huge difference in the long run. And speaking of interconnectedness, this brings us back to Australia, that perfectly controlled experiment we talked about earlier.
The one where it seems like the only explanation for the difference in development between the Aboriginal Australians and those European colonists is, well, race.
Exactly. But Diamond shuts that racist argument down hard. He reminds us that those colonists didn't just show up and invent an advanced society from scratch. They brought with them literally thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, technologies, everything. The crops, the livestock, the tools, even the whole idea of writing, all that came from Eurasia.
So it wasn't about some inherent superiority. It was about inheriting this massive package of advantages.
Exactly. They were walking, talking products of history, of all those interconnected forces we've been talking about. And that, I think, is Diamond's central point. Understanding history means looking beyond those easy answers, those simplistic explanations, and considering all those deep, often invisible forces that have shaped the destinies of different societies.
It's like inheriting a whole civilization, not just a patch of land. But okay, brain wrinkle time. If those early advantages were so huge, how did Europe end up calling the shots later on? I mean, the Fertile Crescent, China, those guys had a massive head start, right?
Right. And that's where Diamond throws us another curveball. He says those early powerhouses might have actually set the stage for their own decline. It's all about this idea of environmental fragility versus resilience.
Wait, so the very things that helped them boom eventually led to their bust?
In a way, yeah. The Fertile Crescent, for example, deforestation and overgrazing, really did a number on the environment. Soil erosion, salt buildup, all that fun stuff made it way harder to support those big populations and complex societies over time.
Ouch. Talk about unintended consequences. What propelled them forward also held them back.
It makes you think, right? About playing the long game, about sustainability. If those early civilizations, as advanced as they were, if they were vulnerable to ecological collapse, what does that say about us?
Sobering thought, for sure. Though Diamond's not just out here trying to bum everyone out, is he?
No, not at all. He's all about using history as a learning tool. He says, by understanding these patterns, these deep forces that shape civilizations, we can make better choices for the future.
So it's less about predicting the future, more about, like, avoiding history's greatest hits.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of books like Guns, Germs, and Steel. They get us thinking critically, challenging those assumptions we didn't even know we had.
It's like that old saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Except, this is more like, those who don't understand the past might accidentally doom us all with their ignorance.
Well, that's a bit dramatic, but you get the idea. By having these conversations, wrestling with these big ideas, that's how we build a better, more sustainable future.
Well said. And on that note, folks, there you have it, our whirlwind tour through Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. Hopefully this deep dive has given you a whole new perspective on history, on how we got to where we are today.
And maybe sparked some curiosity to learn even more. Don't forget, the journey of understanding never ends.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Keep those brains buzzing, everyone, and we'll catch you next time.